So who is ready for some game-changing ideas for those old ideas and shaking them up and making them even better?
Okay. So yes, game changer, making old ideas new again. It's such an important thing now. Every idea has been done, right? We've heard it a million times. So you want your manuscript to excite an agent or an editor, right? You have to ask yourself, what do you feel about your own manuscript? How do you feel about it? Does it excite you? Because if you're not excited about it, how is anybody else going to be excited about it? And you're going to have to be excited about it if you're going to revise and revise and revise and work on it a million times, right? So it's going to then excite a reader. So you want that excitement to show. I'm going to show you these 3 books and why they excite me. And I'm going to tell you there's some very cool little things about these books. So in order to have you look at your own manuscripts through the lens of excitement, that's why I'm going to talk about all these different things. I'm too excited. I've got to calm down. Like I'm stumbling over my words. All right. So this applies no matter what kind of picture book you're working on. If it's a serious book or a quiet book, or whether it's, fiction or nonfiction, serious, whatever, it doesn't matter. You need to be excited about it. And whoever reads it needs to be excited to read it. Let's go. Let's see the first one. Follow That Frog. This story is hysterically funny, and the language is what makes it so funny and quirky. And so it's written by Philip C. Stead, and it's illustrated by Matthew Cordell. And the unexpected language in it got me excited from the very first page. It's not really a fair example, because any book that uses the phrase tragic banana accident is going to make me laugh, and it's going to get me excited, and it's going to draw me in. So let's see how it goes. Sadie's ancient and wackadoo aunt, Josephine, ignores a loud knocking at her door as she tells her niece, Sophie, "Close the curtains, Sadie, and turn off the lights. It could be a vacuum salesman, or more likely a suitor. But I tell you this, I am quite satisfied with the state of my carpets, and my days of romance are but a memory. I have run life's race and have earned my rest. I have been the world over, Sadie, and today I will sleep past noon." The juxtaposition of these phrases, it could be a vacuum salesman, or more likely a suitor, those two together. And then, but I tell you this, I'm quite satisfied with the state of my carpets. What? They're almost non sequiturs, right? And that is what makes it so delicious to read, and what makes it so funny. So Aunt Josephine starts to tell the story of her youth and says, quote, "Of course, in time, my delicate beauty caught the eye of the Admiral's ridiculous son. And as he stood transfixed, he was swiftly swallowed by a giant frog. So she proceeds to follow that giant frog around the world in an effort to save the son, even though she didn't much care for him. And as she chases this giant frog, she has more delicious words. The frog climbs onto a rhea, which is a large bird similar to an ostrich, right? And Philip Stead wrote, quote, "The rhea did what any unfortunate flightless bird would do in such a situation: run and run and run with no particular destination in mind." And the phrasing is so specific and ridiculous that it makes me want to keep reading. It gets me excited about the book, right? So that is really exciting if it's your manuscript and you've generated that excitement in a prospective agent or editor, right? Another thing that adds to my excitement factor is that Philip Stead chose a rhea in the first place instead of an ostrich. It's an odd and quirky word and an odd and quirky choice. Most people would just pick the ostrich. So it makes the language that much more odd and fun. Now we're going to talk about There Are No Ants in This Book by Rosemary, Mosco, and illustrated by Anna Pirolli. It's a meta picture book. And to be clear about what meta means, assuming you saw Barbie, because pretty much everybody did, if you recall, while at the house of Weird Barbie, Barbie emotionally tells the human character Gloria, "I'm not pretty anymore. I'm not stereotypical Barbie pretty." And then the narrator, who's Helen Mirren, can be heard saying, "Note to the filmmakers, Margot Robbie is the wrong person to cast if you want to make this point." And it's being self-referential, right? Like in Deadpool is like the quintessential meta character. He describes an evil superhero who's about to jump off a building, and he says, she's gonna do a superhero landing. Yep, that's really hard on your knees, totally impractical. But to do a self-referencing in a picture book really takes a unique kind of creativity. So for an informational or educational picture book, it's really fresh to do. And it starts out with this girl peeking into the frame, and the line is, "What a nice looking book this is." That's the meta, right? It's the perfect place for, and you turn the page and it says, "A picnic." So it continues, "See, there are no ants in this book." And there's again the meta. It says so on the cover. Ants love to eat picnic food. So, and I do not want to share. The premise is that there is nothing that can ruin a picnic faster than a bunch of ants. It's a good thing there are no ants in this book. But then, one by one, they start showing up, all different kinds. Ones with, and I quote, "amazing butts," like the acrobat ant that waves its back end around to scare off enemies, and the slender leaf ant that can glide through the air, and the dinosaur ant, which is the biggest ant in the world. And it's a meta educational picture book, but it's also a narrative story. And at the end, there's a twist when an anteater also wants to join the picnic. Very fresh, very exciting. Love that book. My first book, Who Hops, was a concept book. So I have a particular affinity toward them. I always love seeing the different ways various concepts can be approached. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's the alphabet or shapes, colors, animal sounds, whatever. And in this case, the concept is math. Kate Reed wrote One Fox, a counting book thriller, and she starts with one famished fox. Nice alliteration, plus a great word to use to set up the tension. I mean, just a famished fox. Well, we know where this is going to be going, right? You need that if you have a book entitled a thriller. The next is Two Sly Eyes. And that is a lovely inverted alliteration and internal rhyme. So she continues counting up. I'm going to skip a few pages, and we get to 5 snug eggs. Babies, you guys, babies. We now have the vulnerability. Okay. That ratchets up the tension. And then, I mean, this isn't just a, barnyard counting book. Okay. She's got the tension going now. And that's fresh. So you see next 6 silent steps as he heads to the hen house, which we've seen in the count up. Now, I also think it's really interesting that she is an author illustrator, but she has the footprints are the thing that we're counting. It's not a concrete thing. Footprints or paw prints are kind of ethereal, right? I mean, like they'll sink into the grass, or I don't know, but they're not concrete. So I thought that was really an interesting choice too. He then knocks 7 times on the hen house door, and then the tension rises some more. And then you see 8 beady eyes. And we're thinking at this point, how are these hens going to get out of this, right? And not to mention, by the way, they're sitting on 5 vulnerable eggs. And still, the tension rises. Dum, dum, dum. And the next page is only hens. We only see the hens now, as opposed to, we've been seeing a lot of the fox. And there are 9 flying feathers. And there's a lot of alliteration in this book. Lovely word choices with natural, unforced alliteration. And now we're thinking, okay, this is it. This is it. They have got to get away, right? But how? And the tension still rises. The next page, we get to 10 sharp teeth. And when I first saw this book read, it was a library book, and it ended right here. And I thought, oh my gosh, Kate Reed is so dark. I love her. I ordered the book because I could not believe that she had the fox eat the hens, and this is all that's left of them. And I was so impressed. And I thought we had another John Klassen on our hands. Talk about a dark ending. And I ordered the book because of this dark ending, and because it was like such a bold move. But it turned out that the library had accidentally glued down the last page, and the reader didn't know it. So here's what comes next. no words, just all these hens rioting. And then the next page after that is 100 angry hens and one frightened fox. So even though I was really excited, and you probably think I'm a very sick person now because I love that ending, I was very excited by the ending. I thought it was. I do love that Kate Reid circled it back by going back to the number one, brought it full circle, and her alliteration of the fox, which went from famished to frightened, one frightened fox. And this is also a good example of a character arc where the character does not get what he wants, but he does change. In fact, going from predator to prey. So I thought that was pretty cool. So these are just 3 books that really have excited me. And so when you go back and look at your manuscript, I hope that you will also take a fresh look at the manuscript you're working on, or the manuscripts, through the lens of excitement. What will be exciting to your reader? So ask yourself, how do I feel about my manuscript? Does it excite me? If not, put it away and work on it later. There's nobody bossing you. You need to be excited about something you're going to have to revise 1 million times. Ask yourself, can I take a fresh look at my manuscript through the lens of excitement? I know I'm excited about my manuscript when I really can't focus on anything else. I go to sleep thinking about it. I wake up thinking about it. It's a little bit irritating, but that's when I know I'm really excited about something. And if you don't feel that way, find comp titles that do excite you and figure out how to massage your text until you're hyper-focused on whatever it is you're working on. Okay. Ask yourself, do I have unexpected language in my manuscript? Remember, Philip Stead used a rhea rather than an ostrich, right? Specificity is funnier than broad. Do I use non sequiturs, odd phrasing, or delicious words? Delicious wording feels great in your mouth, and picture books are meant to be read aloud. So there you go. Makes you want to read the story over and over again. Okay, ask yourself, is my idea or my premise fresh? But ask yourself whether you're telling the same old story or presenting it in a new way. And last, does my ending support my story in a way that leaves the reader satisfied? Again, I'm going to be teaching about endings in my Picture Book Summit workshop, but make sure you don't just focus on your beginning and middle and throw on an easy ending because you are so done with this manuscript, right? You're done with the revising. So I hope that helps you. And I hope I see you on the special day of Picture Book Summit in October. And now I'm throwing it to Julie.
Hello, everyone. All right. Well, let's just keep on going. Speaking of excitement, this is absolutely exciting, and I can't wait to pick up the baton, as it were, and talk about how your personal connection to the story is something that can either, bring freshness and uniqueness, or it can hold you back. And we want, obviously, the former. First off, you need your connection to be strong enough to maintain your passion for this story for a long time, right? Because you're going to be working on this story for a long time through many revisions. And so you have to be able to keep your connection to that original spark. But you don't want it to be so strong that you're unwilling to adapt your initial vision as you go into your revision process. So in other words, you want to keep the spark, but you won't lose the vice grip. Okay. And as Emily Dickinson once said, tell the truth, but tell it slant. Now, the slant is everything, right? That's your storytelling voice and the angle, literally, that you're taking, the heart that you put into it. So that's what's going to elevate your whatever that truth is. And it doesn't have to be a factual truth. It can be an idea that you had. There's always some core of you in every story that's true, but you have to make it work for a story. And another one of our superstar speakers, who is a friend and mentor of mine, Jane Yolen, is famous for saying, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. And that means if you're writing about something that is a memory for you or is based on something that happened, it's okay to embellish it. And this, by the way, is also true for nonfiction. Yes, you have to stay true to the facts, but you get to decide which facts are going into the story. So some truths, some parts of that story just may be getting in the way of telling the best story you possibly can. So we're going to look at 3 examples of personal connection and how this can be used to great benefit and also flexibility. And I didn't even realize until after I put this whole session together that all 3 of the examples are written by former Picture Book Summit superstar speakers. And I guess that's just what happens when you have the caliber of talent that we've had over the past 10 years. The first of which is our very own Emma Walton Hamilton with her mother, Julie Andrews, Waiting in the Wings. The second one we're going to talk about is an upcoming book from Adam Rex, who is one of our speakers, called Tumblebaby. And last, but again, not least, is the story of the saxophone, written by Lisa Klein Ransom, who was a Picture Book Summit speaker, illustrated by her husband, James E. Ransom. So let's start with Waiting in the Wings. If you take the Bay Street Theater, which Emma and her husband co-founded in Sag Harbor, and you add a pair of ducks that nest in a flower box outside of that theater, you will get the personal connection and the spark for Waiting in the Wings. Now, the thing is, so this actually happened. Some ducks nested in a flower pot, and when they hatched, theater staff had to come out and help shepherd them across the road. And Emma herself got to nudge the last one in the water. And this is a very cute, very heartwarming story. But the problem is we already have this story, right? It's called Make Way for Ducklings, #1. And so Emma and her mom both needed and wanted to add additional layers to this story and fanfare. What they did, which was so brilliant, is to take another one of their passions and personal connections, which is their love of the theater and the arts and their strong belief in the importance of exposure to the arts at a very young age. And so it was like, how are we going to do that? Well, they knew that in order to get there, they were going to have to get one of the ducks into the theater. And so in this spread, you can see Papa Puddle Duck, or Mr. P, as he's called, looking at this sign. And it's brilliant because, of course, there's the feathers. And I love how he says, feathers, that's a good sign. Which, speaking of language, is also a double entendre, right? A sign being, it's an indicator of something good, but it's also an actual sign in this case. And so they settle into the flower pot. And being intrigued by the sign, Mr. P ends up going into the theater. And he is riveted, just captivated by the color and the sounds and the costumes. And I really love this illustration because even though Mr. P is teeny tiny, the spotlight is on him, which is foreshadowing when they call and action. And then going forward, you see Mr. P on the stage. He just cannot contain himself. And he's flapping his feathers along with the performers, which leads us to, now remember the spark, right? The theater staff this actually happened, helping to herd the ducks along to safety. But now we have this so enhanced by they're in all of their regalia and their costumes, and you can almost hear the cars and the horns and the shaking. You can see the shaking of the feathers. And Mr. P himself, because he's been in the theater, is the one to call and action as they march along. So they took this initial story spark and made it so much more by adding in the arts component and the music and the theater, and absolutely, absolutely wonderful. Okay, next up, we're going to take a look at Tumblebaby by Adam Rex. And I came across this story I'm a subscriber to Adam Rex's Substack, which I highly recommend, by the way. And a week or so ago, he talked about this book. And these are cartoons that he included in this email, which is another reason why you should subscribe, because really, it's brilliant. So he says, in 2014, he and his wife became parents. They were given custody of a 22-month-old boy who didn't understand English, and in Adam's typical humor, felt like we'd been dropped into a 4th-semester parenting class without any of the prerequisites. I have that math dream all the time. Okay, so they didn't have a crib, and they didn't have papers to get out of the country yet. So they pushed the beds together and laid their little boy down in the middle. And I absolutely love this line where he says, then we watched him like he was made of dreams and might vanish if we looked away. Aw. But then that's foreshadowing, because as you can see, it turns out that he was a quote unquote wayfaring sort of sleeper. So in the beginning of this book, even though the illustrations are very dreamy and magical realism, it says that first night, mommy tried to put baby in the crib. Dad says, no, I don't like fences. So they made a little bed instead. So even though the illustrations are very, very dreamy and so forth, the text is tracking pretty much to what we already saw from Adam's very personal connection to this story. But then, and again, it's still tracking the baby all night. It flopped and it flipped and it rolled. And by the next morning, it had tumbled out of bed across the floor. And actually now is where we have a major departure. Baby goes out the door. And then it's like, whoa, okay, now we are completely off the rails from the original story idea, right? The baby is rolling along and it comes across coyotes. And I love that the coyote says that there is a regular Tumblebaby, and a coyote can eat a baby if he finds it on the ground, if its mom doesn't mind. And then when the coyote goes in for a bite, Tumblebaby tumbled, and all it got was a mouthful of diaper. Amazing, because obviously this did not happen to Adam's son, but the mouthful of diaper, I mean, I can just hear the kids screeching with laughter, right? And so that is not true. That is not what happened, but that emotional truth, which is that fear that they had of something happening to their child, is still there, but we've just blown it completely up into a story that's outrageous and funny. All right, next up is Story of a Saxophone. So if you take Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young, you will get hopefully the story of the saxophone, which is a preeminent instrument for jazz musicians. Lisa and her husband James have done quite a few books together. They're a husband and wife team, and they often chat about ideas. And they had seen a jazz documentary, and James said to Lisa, what if we did a picture book where it was sort of a kind of a dual biography of Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young, and how they sounded so different, but they both kind of made the saxophone, what it is today. And Lisa thought that was a great idea. And so she started doing some research, but very quickly ran into trouble because, and I saw her give a presentation about this book, and the way she put it was, once she started reading about these two men and their lives, she was just so bored. She was like, her eyeballs were dry from boredom. And as she put it, I can't write a story unless I have a personal connection to it. And she wasn't getting that. So what she did was she asked herself a simple question, which was, who invented the saxophone? And what she uncovered was the incredible story of a boy named Joseph Antoine Adolphe Sax. Everybody called him Adolphe. And he was the only son of an instrument maker in Belgium, of all places. And by the time he was 10 years old, he had fallen down a flight of stairs, he'd swallowed a needle, he'd been poisoned 3 times, nearly drowned, been burned by gunpowder, and had been knocked into a coma from a loose roof tile. And she was like, okay, this is where the juice is for me. This is just incredible. So she started following his story. It led to Adolphe inventing the saxophone because he was looking to create an instrument that combined the sweet notes of a clarinet with the deep, low tones of a trumpet and the delicacy of a violin. It was his masterpiece. And in that line, you can feel Lisa's love and reverence for the music the saxophone creates, right? And she wasn't going to get that by writing about 2 men whose lives she found really dull. But we go back there, though. Coleman Hawkins heard Sidney play, and Lester Young heard Coleman play, and Charlie Parker heard Lester play, right? So she came back to that kernel of an idea, which is what sparked the book in the first place. But it wasn't their stories that needed to be told, at least not by her. So instead, she found another way that gave her an even deeper connection to what she was writing, even though it was not her original idea. Okay, so how can you catapult your own connections to elevate them in your own storytelling? First off, remember that it's the specific that leads to the universal. So you have to take something like, you can take something very specific, like your baby falls out of bed all the time, right? Or ducklings are hatching in a flower pot. But where does that lead? Is it just beyond like a funny little anecdote? You have to take it out, pan it out to something that's universal. All right. And remember to stay, if you're ever concerned that you're being too nitty-gritty about the facts and that's getting in the way in the story, reconnect to your emotional truth, because that's the one that is the most important. Even if you're writing nonfiction, it's the heart of what is connecting you to that story. And you want to make sure it's child relatable, right? Because not everything that's true or that happened, or even, memories that you have, are relatable to today's children, which is also a very key point, right? So you need to make sure it works for an audience of today's children. What you want to do is play with alternate endings, fantastical elements, and exaggerating events like what happened in Waiting in the Wings. And if it's nonfiction, again, play with which pieces of the story that you start with or end with, or what's included. And then always ask yourself, what if, right? What if? How can I make this story more outlandish, more funny, silly, and more meaningful? And if you keep asking yourself those questions and you don't stop at your first idea because that was what connected to you, it will expand and hopefully explode into something that is very fresh and original. And with that, I am now going to pass the baton to Emma.
All right. Thank you, Julie. That was amazing, you guys. Tough acts to follow, you are, both of you, but here we go. I'm going to talk a little bit about turning your idea upside down. When I was a little kid, my mom used to always say to me, stand on your head about it. And this is what we're going to do tonight. We're going to stand our ideas on their heads. So the purpose of looking at your idea in this way is to avoid predictability or cliche or duplication of other people's books. You want to make it fresh. You want to make it your own, even if it's an idea that's familiar or been done before. And when we speak of turning an idea upside down, we're actually talking about doing something unexpected, something surprising or new, rather than recycling an idea that's been done before or done in a similar way. And there are many ways to do this, to experiment with turning ideas on their heads, some of which include twisting or playing with character, setting, an event, or another element in a way that you didn't and the reader won't anticipate. You really are looking to shake up your reader's expectations. So let's look at some ways to do that. The first few ways we're going to explore involve changing the point of view or perspective, subverting expected characters or characteristics by leaning into the unexpected, and changing up the setting to make it feel fresh and surprising. So let's take a look at some of these examples in action. Adam Rex's School's First Day of School brilliantly turns an old idea on its head by telling a first day of school story from the point of view of the school itself. We have so many first day of school picture books out there, but none that tell the story of the day from the school's point of view. Totally brilliant. Deborah Underwood's Exoplanet also uses a fresh point of view to tell a familiar story. In this case, it's the classic new kid trying to fit in, but told here from the point of view of the planets, who form a social group that the new kid, an exoplanet, wants to break into. It raises the question of who or what is different and explores the very nature of point of view itself, while also giving readers some great scientific information about the planetary system, and it's all told in epistolary fashion, like notes passed in school. Again, old idea, fresh approach. Gillian Hoffman's A River of Dust, the life-giving link between North Africa and the Amazon, also uses a fresh perspective to introduce scientific concepts. So told from the perspective of a speck of African dust, it takes readers on a journey across continents to show the wonder of Earth's ecosystems. This is an ode to global connection and to the vital roles that even the smallest among us can play. Certainly themes we've encountered before in picture books, but never from this unusual perspective. Flavia C. Dragg's Vlad the Fabulous Vampire turns expected characters and characterizations on their head with its hero, Vlad, who is a totally fabulous vampire who loves to dress up in all different kinds of black outfits, but suffers from the embarrassing problem of very healthy pink cheeks. This is a fresh take on the theme of authenticity and finding your community. And it's illustrated in a unique style also, which is influenced by the author-illustrator's specific Mexican heritage. Megan Brown's The Bees of Notre Dame uses an unexpected setting and point of view to tell the story of the great Notre Dame and the fire that almost destroyed it, by focusing on the honeybee colonies that lived on the cathedral's roof. Now, there are plenty of books about Paris and about Notre Dame, but none that celebrate its history from the perspective of bees. And there are plenty of books about bees, but none set at Notre Dame. Maya Tetsukawa's Mole is Not Alone uses character and setting to turn the familiar idea of social anxiety upside down. Here we have an agonizingly shy mole who dreads attending a birthday party he's been invited to. His journey unfolds underground as he tunnels his way to his destination, while a second story unfolds above ground in the illustrations, until the two worlds converge in a sweet and surprising way. And Rachel Bright and Nadia Shireen's Snail in Space also puts an unusual character in an unusual setting to tell a familiar story of courage and persistence. So here we have a snail who dreams of being an astronaut. Of course, being a snail, there are all sorts of obstacles that get in the way of her dream, but persistence pays off. Now, it's already fun and fresh to use a snail to tell a story about persistence, but putting her in space really sets that idea on its head. Some other ways we can turn an idea upside down include playing with time and structure, both narrative and the physical structure of the book itself, and also utilizing a surprise or a twist ending. So let's look at some examples of these in action. Jason Reynolds' There Was a Party for Langston plays with time and takes a fresh approach to picture book biography. In this case, the literary genius Langston Hughes. So rather than using sequential time to share the events of his life, as many picture book biographies do, Reynolds focuses on a moment after Hughes's death, when a party was thrown in his honor at the Schomburg Library and attended by all sorts of other celebrities who are looking back at the ways in which Hughes informed their lives. This is a reflective approach that still manages to be a totally joyous and active celebration. Corey Tabor is probably the master when it comes to playing with the physical structure of books. So both Mel Fell and his latest book, Ursula Upside Down, ask the reader to hold the book in unusual ways, vertically or horizontally or literally upside down, to experience the story. I mean, here we are literally turning our ideas upside down, right? Vashti Harrison's Big, this year's Caldecott Medal winner, also plays with physical structure at one of the book's turning points. She literally pushes the gatefolds wide, turning the image of herself into a 4-page spread that expands beyond the confines of the book itself. This entire book stands the idea of fitting in on its head in numerous ways: character, setting, structure, and this additional creative piece is just a genius way to underscore the book's themes. Orianne Smith's and Alice Gravier's Days Like This takes a different approach to narrative structure, this time telling the same story of a single day from 2 parallel points of view on opposing pages. One is up close and personal, and the other is from a more distanced perspective. Same text on both sides of the page, different illustrations. It isn't until the end of the book that we find out who these corresponding points of view are, which adds surprise to the mix. Monica Arnaldo's Mr. S is another refreshing take on the first day of school trope. So when a kindergarten class arrives for the first day of school, there's no sign of their teacher, only a bologna sandwich on the desk and the words Mr. S scribbled on the chalkboard. As the kids grapple with whether the sandwich is in fact their teacher, Mr. S could stand for Mr. Sandwich, after all, there's a secondary story unfolding outside the window in the illustrations, leading to a surprise twist ending that I won't spoil. But again, plenty of first day of school books, but this one spins the trope in several new directions. Finally, Jessie Sema's Spencer's New Pet is probably the best example of a surprise twist ending that I've ever seen. And it's so good, I don't want to spoil the moment for those of you who haven't yet read it. But suffice it to say that Jessie Sema does a brilliant job using the creative style of an old silent movie. This is a wordless picture book, after all, and gives us a superb twist ending to explore the very familiar and ordinary idea of pet ownership. I can't recommend it highly enough. Read it, you guys. So now let's wrap up with a quick refresher of the many ways in which you can play with turning your idea on its head. All on one page here, you can play with character by looking for an unexpected personality trait, by subverting expectations, playing with or reversing gender, species, or some other familiar standard. You can change up the point of view. You can use first, second, third, or take an unexpected character's perspective. You can play with plot and structure by exploring a plot twist or rearranging the sequence of events. Instead of this standard narrative arc, for instance, you could try playing with a circular sequence like in One Fox that Katie shared with us, or cumulative events, or a parallel story like Days Like This, or telling the story by looking backwards like A Party for Langston, or telling it meta, and so forth. You can play with structure related to your story like Corey Tabor and Vashti Harrison did, or you can put in a surprise ending like Mr. S and Spencer's New Pet. Remember to use the page turn to surprise the reader. Mac Barnett gave us a brilliant presentation on page turns in a previous picture book summit, but the page turn is a great way to surprise. You can also use setting. You can explore setting your story in a different and unexpected time, such as the past or maybe even the future. You can set it in a different place, such as underground or in space. And even if you're an author only and not an illustrator, you can think up some ways to subvert or use surprising visual elements to freshen or shake up your story. The point is, aim for originality. Ask yourself, have I avoided cliches and familiar, obvious tropes? And if not, how can I subvert them, especially if they're absolutely necessary? So those are some ways to turn your ideas upside down. I hope you guys have enjoyed them and enjoyed this presentation. And Kelly, I'm going to hand it back to you.